Welcome to the Newsome MMA betting podcast sponsored by CBD Life UK. I'm your host, always Newsome, and tonight we're going to be breaking down the Ultimate Fighter 27 finale in Vegas. We are blessed with two fight cards this week, with it being International Fight Week. So the TUF finale is a Friday night card, with UFC 226 being the Saturday night card. I've got bets on both fight cards, so there'll be two episodes of the Newsome MMA betting podcast this week also. And I've got a little surprise for you guys too with the UFC 226 episode, so keep an eye out for that. So let's break some fights down. As always, I've got my bets listed for you guys. I'll break those down in full for you. Anything else that I haven't bet, I'll quick fire off at the end. I'll give you a pick, a method of victory, and ultimately a reason why I've passed on that fight as well. So the first full breakdown of the podcast, we've got Alessio Chirico versus Julian Marquez. Now, this isn't a bet yet, but it will be a bet. And I'm just sort of waiting for the lines to catch up over here in the UK and also gauging where the lines are currently going to go in America and in Canada as well. So the bet's going to be Alessio Chirico. I'm going to be having 1.5 units on him, and I'm going to be looking hopefully to get anywhere between plus 130 and plus 150. So it is going to be an underdog play, and I really like him in this fight. I think with Marquez, I'm still a bit confused of exactly where he's at and sort of what he really excels at in mixed martial arts, aside from his power and his brute strength. Now, with Alessio Chirico, I think that he's a very technical fighter on the feet. He's also got wrestling as well. So his all-round game is something that I think I quite like, and is something that is definitely developing and definitely going to get better as well. Now, the one concern that I've got with Julian Marquez, and it's not a concern for this fight in regards to the bet that I'm going to be placing, it's actually a plus for Chirico, and one of the reasons why I've made this bet is Julian Marquez's gas tank. I just don't think the guy's got great cardio. I've watched multiple fights and he seems to gas in pretty much every single fight that I've seen. I think that he's got a really strong and quick and powerful round one, comes out the blocks really fast, really hard, and I think with this bet we are going to have to weather a storm with Chirico, but it's a storm that I think can definitely be weathered. I think that, like I've just mentioned, Marquez is going to come out fast, he's going to come out hard. Chirico, I think, has got the ability to sort of see things coming and maybe get himself out of these winging shots. If they clinch up, it's going to be really interesting because both guys are quite good in the clinch, the tie clinch, plum clinch, however you want to call it. I think if these guys do start to clinch up, I think it'll be interesting to see who gets the upper hand. But ultimately, I trust that Chirico is smart enough to get himself out of bad situations, circle away from the fence, not allow himself to get backed up too much. These are all things that he's going to need to do, and I'm confident that he can do that. Now, after round one, I think that even if Chirico loses round one, which is very probable, I think after round one, I think it's going to be all Chirico. He's going to be the one that's fresher. He's going to be the one that will then start pushing forward, will then start pushing Marquez back. I think he'll be the one landing the more significant and effective strikes. Now, the one thing that I do worry about is if Marquez comes out a different fighter here. If he comes out patient, comes out reserved, sort of saving energy, it's going to be really interesting because it's going to be something that ultimately we haven't seen inside the cage with him, and it'll be really interesting to see sort of how the fight goes at that point. But I think if Marquez doesn't come out quick, and if he is reserved and saving that energy, Chirico will be the one that. I think he'll be able to start finding his shots at that point, with his striking, because he'll have time to think, he'll have time to move, he'll have time to sort of process his strikes, and it'll be easier for him not having a quick sort of bull rushing at him, making him think fast. So I like Chirico even at that point as well. Now, the other thing that I touched upon is Chirico's got really good wrestling now. Coming from Europe, it's not something that we see too often. That translating into MMA, especially at this level of MMA. I'm not saying that there aren't any great wrestlers in Europe, because they definitely are. It's just we don't see it too often. You always seem to find that the Americans and Canadians always seem to have that edge, because wrestling's more of a prominent sport over in the States and in Canada than it is over in Europe. But it's really good to see Chirico having that wrestling base and using it as well. He hasn't used it too much so far, but we have seen glimpses of it. And you can even tell he's a wrestler just by looking at his ears, because the cauliflower ears are a real thing for you wrestling guys. So yeah, I think that's a tactic that can and that's a game plan that can be adopted against Marquez as well. Because if Marquez is coming in strong, or even if, like I say, we see a different Marquez in his reserve, it wouldn't surprise me if Chirico's team, which is American Top Team, by the way, I'll touch upon that in a minute, has a game plan for him to come out and really use his wrestling to take Marquez down and to drain that gas tank. Even if he's not totally successful in putting Marquez flat on his back and working top control, just taking Marquez down and making him stand back up. Making him stop the takedown to start with, then taking him down, then making him stand up. That's going to drain his gas tank even worse. And we saw that in the Phil Hawes fight as well. I know Marquez got that brutal knockout head kick in that fight, but before that, he was completely gassed out. So I just think that when Marquez is gassed out in this fight, if it does happen, at that point, it's Chirico's fight. I don't see him dropping the ball in that position. And then, like I said, and like I've just touched upon a minute ago with the American Top Team situation, I believe it's now his third fight with ATT. And I know some fighters personally that have gone to American Top Team from Europe, and a common thing that I've noticed with those guys is it does take time to adapt, and it does take a few fight camps and a few fights for the development to really start showing in that fighter as well, because they are adapting to not just a different country but a completely different continent, a different way of life, different weather, leaving the families at home and things like that. It all, when you add it all together, you can understand why it sometimes takes a little bit of time. And I do think that after maybe 2 or 3 fights and 2 or 3 fight camps, you really then start to see the ATT development showing out in the fighters that have obviously moved over to the gym from different countries. And this is sort of the situation where Chirico is at the minute. I do think we're going to see a better Chirico than we've ever seen. I think that this will be the fight where people will open their eyes and think, holy shit, right, now we can see the development that ATT have made on this guy. And I do think he's going to go out there and really put on a solid performance. Marquez finishes most of his fights. Like I said, he's got hard shots in his punches, in his elbows, in his knees, and in his kicks. But Chirico is not a fighter that we've ever seen in trouble. He's got never been knocked out or TKO'd. I can't remember ever seeing him get dropped. So I think he's a fighter that's got really good fight IQ, especially on the feet, being able to stay out of range and stay out of the power shots of his opponents, and really working his own game. So it's a fight that I really like. I think he's going to get the win. I really like the plus money. It will definitely, like I've mentioned, it'll definitely be a bet. It'll be 1.5 units at anywhere between plus 130 and above, really. So yeah, moving on to the next full breakdown, we've got Luis Violent Bob Ross Peña against Richie Smullen. 2 guys that were in the house, and 2 guys that things really didn't go as planned for them in the house either. Luis Peña, he won his first fight, then he got injured. Dana White turned around to the guy and just said, look, heal up, you'll be back for the finale. That really shows you what Dana White thinks about the guy as well. He's exciting. He's definitely a prospect. Definitely a fighter that, definitely a fighter that I don't think we've even scratched the surface with his ability inside the cage and with MMA. So it's really going to be exciting to see the development of this kid. Then we've got Richie Smullen. Now, Richie Smullen, he didn't even have a fight in the house. He was injured before his fight. So now Dana White's giving him a chance on the card. It's really good matchmaking, I think, from both of these guys. Now, obviously we saw bits of Peña, but I had to dive into tape regardless anyway with Smullen because I needed to see what he was about. But Peña was a guy that had quite a bit of hype about him. He looked good. He looked the part. Yeah, he was a good guy. So it's a fight that I taped for a potential bet. So from what I saw of Richie Smullen, he seems to not have so much in the striking department. He's a fighter that does like to close the distance and get his opponents to the mat. So this instantly made me worry because I really liked Peña, but I really don't want to be in a position where I'm betting against a guy that's path to victory is to get your other fighter down, and did look okay at it as well. So I needed to make sure that Luis Peña can defend takedown. So I dived into Luis Peña, not some with tape definitely, but I also delved a little bit further into seeing what sort of wrestling or grappling background he had, just to give myself that confidence that he can defend the takedowns if Smullen tries to get him down, which I totally believe he will. And obviously, if I didn't have that confidence, I wouldn't have made the bet. I've been burned 3 times in the past betting against guys with wrestling heavy game plans, and it won't happen a 4th time. So, yeah, when I dived into Peña, I found that the guy was actually a pretty successful wrestler. He's got 10 years wrestling experience. I think he's 24 now, so he's been wrestling from, the age of 14. So he's been wrestling for a long time, and he's also coached it as well. So yeah, and when I was sort of looking at this background, I even went into some of his wrestling bouts as well, and had a look at them. Not that it's so relevant for MMA. I was just intrigued, and I just wanted to see what he's about. But the dude scrambles really well. His balance is really good. And I was seeing all the things that I needed to see and that I wanted to see from sort of the defensive stance with Smullen potentially being the aggressor with takedowns. And yeah, I was really happy to bet Luis Peña after tape. I got him at -200. That was actually quite a lucky line. One of the UK books was lagging on the line. They'd not updated it to where the rest of the UK was at, and also America and Canada as well. I think when I snatched that -200, I think he was like -280 elsewhere. So it really was a steal of a line. I put 4 units on him at -200 to win 2 units back. So yeah, I think that when you look into the styles, Peña tends to use his wrestling as a plan B, which I absolutely don't mind at all. If it's not working for him on the feet, he's got something to fall back on. I love that. He's a really unorthodox and a really fun striker to watch. And remember, he's wrestling turned MMA, so his striking is only going to develop, and it's going to develop at a rapid pace. We will, in his next, in his next 2, 3, 4 fights, you'll notice drastic differences in every single one, and he'll improve every single time. Like I've mentioned already, it's going to be really fun to see the development of this kid. One thing that I saw with Richie Smullen in tape is when he's on the feet and he's the one being pushed back and his opponent's being the aggressor with strikes. I mentioned this with Song Yadong and Felipe Aranches in my last podcast. With Aranches covering up, Smullen has the same sort of traits. When a striker's starting to land shots, he tends to cover up and tries to see the combination out rather than circling away and things like that. And I just think that in this position with Luis Peña, tape's perfect for this because one of his previous fights, I don't remember the guy's name, but one of his previous fights, Peña did exactly that. He was throwing strikes, he backed his opponent up against the cage, the opponent just put his hands up on his face, covered up, and just tried to ride the combination out. And what you saw from Peña is you saw elbows straight through the middle of the guard. You saw hooks from either side of the arms through the guard as well, landing really good shots. You heard his corner. His corner was screaming body shots. So he landed a few body shots. And then he ducked down and took the guy down. His hands were that high, he wasn't doing anything. So he just took the guy down and started beating him up on the mat. And I think he ended up getting a submission in that as well. So I actually think his fight IQ is really smart. His shot selection is really good as well. Excuse me, I've got a really bad throat. So yeah, his shot selection is really good, and yeah, I just think if Smullen covers up against him, I think that he's going to be in trouble. Now, when Smullen comes to try and take Peña down, because I totally believe that's going to happen. Peña's really, really good at scrambling. He's really good at reversing. And the one thing that I noticed in every single one of his fights where someone tries to take him down, the first thing he looks for is that whizzer. So he gets the whizzer in as he's being taken down, and then once he's sort of on his knee, he can then reverse, he can then sweep, or he can use it to stand back up. And he's really, really savvy and really clever with using that. And it's something that, like I've just mentioned, he looks for sort of as a first port of call. So I think that with Richie Smullen, his takedowns, from what I've seen anyway, don't tend to be your singles and your doubles. They tend to be body lock clinches into trips. I think that if you're going to be trying that against Peña will be defending that. He's got, like I've mentioned already, he's got good balance. He'll get that whizzer in straight away as he's being taken down. He'll sweep, he'll scramble, he'll get back up to his feet. He'll do whatever he has to do to make sure he doesn't go flat on his back. And I totally believe that that's going to be the case. And if Richie Smullen is sort of not 100% on his takedown game as well, I do think that he could end up being flat on his back himself. And if he does that, he's going to be in a lot of trouble, because Peña looks as slick as what you can imagine a wrestler to be on top. Transitions from position really well, smooth, slick transitions, looks to get to mount, looks for submissions, looks for elbows, ground and pound. He's got the full package when it comes to his top control. So I'm really confident here. I think ultimately what's going to happen, I think Smullen's going to come out. He's going to look to clinch up with Peña, close the distance, and get him down. I think we're going to see maybe 2, 3, or 4 failed attempts for takedowns and getting Peña on his back. At that point, I think it is going to demoralise Smullen, because that will be his path to victory. That is his game. And from then, I think Peña can grow into the fight. I think he'll be the one moving forward, putting the pressure on, really, really starting to back Smullen up against the cage. I think Smullen's going to cover up, like I've already mentioned. And we're just going to, like I've said already, we're going to see elbows through the middle of the guard. We're going to see good shot selection. We're going to see shots to the body. We could even see Peña ducking down and taking Smullen to the mat as well. Ultimately, I think he's gonna finish Richie Smullen. I think when he's covered up against the fence, I think at some point the shots, whether it's a bit to the body or through the guard, are just going to be a little bit too much for Smullen. I think Smullen's going to drop, and it's not going to be like a clean knockout or anything, but he's definitely going to need the ref to save him. And I think that's how Peña gets the job done. Now, in regards to Peña's fight camp as well, he used to train at ATT before he went into the house. After he's come out of the Ultimate Fighter house, it looks like he's followed DC back to AKA as well, where he's going to have some phenomenal guys to train with. Obviously, DC himself, Cain Velasquez, you've got Abib over there, you've got Alex Perez, you've got some awesome guys over there. So he's really going to be surrounded by a lot of people with this with his development process. And like I said, I'm really excited for it. So yeah, I've got 4 units on Luis Peña to win 2 units at -200. And that's it for the full breakdowns, guys. Here's the quick fire round now. So I'll just jump straight into this. We've got, for the first fight, and it's actually the main event, we've got Brad Tavares versus Israel Adesanya. I also looked at this fight for a bet as well. Ultimately, I just couldn't do it. I did like Brad Tavares at plus money. I think the vet experience is really going to pay off for him here. But the reason why I haven't bet is because I genuinely believe it's going to be that close. So close it will. I could easily envisage a split decision here. And when you get split decisions, they could ultimately go either way. And especially with Israel Adesanya and his style, his flashy style, his exciting style. He'll get all the oohs and the ahs from the crowd. Ultimately that can be in favour for the judges if it goes that close. So I think Brad Tavares got a close distance. He's got to take him down early on to try and test that gas tank, because that's the other thing as well. When I was taping this, I was hoping to see Israel slow down sort of late second round and third round. I didn't see any signs of that, so I do believe that he can go into the championship rounds in this fight, rounds 4 and 5, potentially looking fresh. But again, it's an unknown, it's a red flag, it's an intangible. So these are all things that sort of put me off the bet. The other side to it is there was rumours that Brad Tavares nearly pulled out this fight with a foot injury. Don't know how much stock to put into that. So yeah, ultimately it was an easy pass, but I'm going Brad Tavares to win via decision, which, like I've mentioned, is probably going to be a split. Next quick fire pick, we've got Mike Trizano versus Joe Gianetti, which is the Ultimate Fighter finale for the lightweights. I like Joe Gianetti in this. I think he's going to get the win. I think it's probably going to be a submission or potentially a decision. It's a tough fight to call, because both guys obviously looked good in the house. I think Joe Gianetti looked a bit better in the house, but then when you look back at the records, Mike Trizano has fought the slightly better competition, with Joe Gianetti fighting the slightly lower level competition. So you've got to factor that in as well. And like I've said, well, there's not even a line out for this yet, so you sort of can't even gauge whether if there's going to be any value on this fight whatsoever. I think that Gianetti is more of a finisher. He has that spark in the fight, whereas Trizano's quite well rounded, wins by knockout, submission, and decision as well. Whereas Joe Gianetti's got that finishing ability behind him. He's got slick submissions. I think if Trizano shoots in, I think it'll give Gianetti opportunities to wrap something up, whether it be a choke or grabbing onto a limb or whatever it is. So yeah, I'm going with Joe Gianetti, and I'll go with the submission. I think that he'll be able to catch Trizano with something. So the next fight, we've got Bruce Leroy Caceres against Martin Bravo, and again, it's a really tricky fight to pick, and one that I wouldn't advise betting whatsoever. The pick's Martin Bravo. I think he'll get the win, but I think that's more of a not trusting Alex Caceres than anything else. And what I mean by that is, if Caceres comes into this fight and he looks great, he'll win, because when he looks great, he does look like a really awesome fighter, and a fighter that would look like you could see him progressing on to do great things. But then in other fights, he'll come out and he'll not be on his game, and he'll look real. You can really tell that he's not on his game, and it really shows in his performance as well. I think if that fighter comes in against Martin Bravo will smoke him. But if Alex Caceres comes in and is on his game, I think Caceres will smoke Martin Bravo. So it's almost as if you're gambling on what Caceres we're seeing here. I ain't prepared to take that gamble. The pick's Martin Bravo. I think that even though he's coming off that brutal KO loss to Bandanai, it was a brutal KO, it was a flash KO, but he didn't take so much damage in that. He was out cold straight away, so he didn't take any unnecessary damage. I think he's going to be looking to bounce back from that. I think he'll put on a performance here. And I'm sort of with the pick. I'm sort of thinking that maybe we don't see the greatest Alex Caceres. But like I say, if he turns up, then he wins the fight. So it's a tough one to pick. The pick's Martin Bravo. I wouldn't recommend betting on it. Next one, we've got Roxanne Modaferri against Barb Honchak. Again, another close fight. Another fight that I absolutely want nothing to do with in regards from the betting perspective. We've got Roxanne Modaferri that, again, when she shows up, she wins fights that you wouldn't expect her to win. But when she doesn't show up, she loses fights that you do expect her to win. So it's a similar case with her as it is with Bruce Leroy that I've just spoke about. Barb Honchak, on the other hand, has got takedowns and a well-rounded game as well. Ultimately, I think the takedowns might play a part here. I'll always favour the person that that looks for getting the fight to the mat and to work top control. So the pick's Barb Honchak. It's not a confident one, and I don't see a finish, so the pick is by decision. The next fight is one that I did bet on. Sorry, that I didn't bet on. I looked to bet on via tape, and I actually taped the fight for a potential bet on Rachael Ostovich, because I know Ostovich has got takedowns. I know she works at wrestling. That's a path to victory. It's all things that I really like to look at initially before I start watching footage on these fighters. So I watched her to see, how good the wrestling was, how solid the top control was, and ultimately I just wasn't sold that much. Not that I wasn't sold in her ability. I just know that De La Rosa's got a wrestling background herself, and I'm not sure whether it's going to be enough to nullify De La Rosa, and ultimately I don't think it is going to be. De La Rosa's also got the advantage here in the striking, which I think will be the difference in the fight. I think the wrestling will cancel each other out. I don't see De La Rosa having too much success in the wrestling, and vice versa with Ostovich, although I think Ostovich will try more. So yeah, I think that the striking will play a key part, and the pick's De La Rosa to win by decision. Now, obviously, I haven't bet this. The line's sort of around the -180 mark, I think. So it's sort of odds that, because I'm quite confident De La Rosa does win this fight, but I can't bet her at those odds when I know that her opponent is going to be looking to take this fight down at every opportunity. So it wouldn't surprise me if Ostovich won, and for that reason I can't bet -180 on the other side. Next we've got Matt Bessette against Stephen Peterson. Another really close fight. We've got Bessette that's going to have a huge striking advantage here. We've got Peterson that will probably look to take this fight to the mat as we've seen previously. Not that he's sort of a really dominant wrestler or anything. He's just a well-rounded guy. I just think that I think that we'll see him not be that successful on the feet, and therefore will result in trying to take the fight to the mat. But I think Bessette can get the finish here. I think that he could KO him, maybe TKO him. I'm not sure when. It's not a confident pick. I'd really like. I don't hate the bet. If anyone's bet Matt Bessette, I don't hate that bet at all. Sort of around the -150 mark. For me, I'm just struggle to trust both these guys with my money, and again, that's not a detriment to the fighters or the style. I just haven't seen enough of them at this level. I'd like to see, obviously, this fight and maybe another fight from either guy, and that'll sort of give me a really good gauge of where they're at. I just think they're really quite tough guys to read and see where they're at in their career. So that's all it is with them. But yeah, Matt Bessette is my pick, and I think he gets it done with a finish. The next fight is a really good fight. We've got Gerald Meerschaert versus Oskar Piechota. Now, this is a fight that I taped a lot, and I really wanted to bet, but I just couldn't, and I'll explain why. So, I really like Piechota. I think that he's a very well-rounded guy. He's got he's got power on his feet in his strikes, and I think he's got a really, really slick submission and grappling game. Now, the problem is Meerschaert's also got a really slick and good submission and grappling game as well. So I think it's going to come down to, if it's not who can maintain top control, it's who's going to be better on the feet, which is, in my opinion, Oskar Piechota. Now, something really weird happened with the lines, and it happened with a few of these fights. It happened with Piechota, it happened with Luis Peña, I believe, and it happened with Julian Marquez. Piechota, Peña, Marquez all opened huge favourites, and within one of the days, can't remember which day it was now, in the morning, we'll take Piechota as the example because that was the line I was hawking. So Piechota was -400 as I woke up. At dinner time, had gone to pick 'em odds -120 a piece. So I thought, wow, that's a huge movement from -400 to -120. And then a couple of hours later, he was +195. And at this point, I'm thinking, what is going on? Is there something weird happening with money in the books, or it sort of really threw me completely because I was expecting Piechota to be quite a huge favourite. So ultimately, what I think's happened is I think the books had dropped the lines for the Ultimate Fighter finale, and they weren't getting a lot of action. So I think what has happened is the books have shook up the lines themselves in order to reel in bettors and start throwing money at the event. Once money starts coming at the event, then they can sort of gauge where the line is and capture more money up until the point that they're happy with it. So I think it was a sneaky move by the books, but you can never be sure. Now, I would have taken Piechota at any plus money. I will say that now. And if this line comes, because the line's sort of at like the minus 200 mark now, if for whatever reason it comes back down again to sort of minus 130, minus 140, I'll make it a bet as well. But I don't believe that's gonna happen now. I thought it was going to at one point as it was rising back up from, I think it went from plus 195 to plus 120, plus 100. Then we started to see the minuses coming back. So if it comes back, I'll take it. I think that Piechota knocks him out. But don't be surprised if Meerschaert gets on top and starts working a submission game himself. Both guys are really good on the ground. It would actually be really fun to see a grappling battle between these guys. If the fight hits the floor, I'd be really interested to see what happens. But I think the stand-up is going to be key here. I think both guys will keep it stood up because I think they'll both be wary of each other's game. And one mistake in the takedown, the trip, or whatever it is, could ultimately result on the other guy being on top, and that could be the end of the fight if a submission's work. So I think we might see both of them being quite hesitant to do work on the mat. So I think it'll go down to the striking, and I think Oskar will get the better of him and knock him out. Then the last fight on the card, and one that I think's bamboozled a lot of people into sort of why this fight is even on the card. And we've got John Gunther against Alan Zuniga. And the reason I'm saying it's bamboozled a lot of people is because both of these fighters didn't really show out too great in the show. Both lost the fights. Zuniga lost very quickly, submitted by Joe Gianetti. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. Ultimately, I'm going to go with John Gunther. I don't really have a lot to say about this fight. I think John Gunther, he did take Trizano down a couple of times. Again, it wasn't anything spectacular. I'm just trying to think and pick a reason why I'm going with John Gunther. So please don't bet this fight. That's my only advice I can give to anybody listening to this. I think John Gunther will maybe get a few takedowns on Zuniga. He's a slightly bigger fighter as well, so he will have a physical advantage, and I think he'll use that to his advantage in this fight. So the pick's John Gunther, probably win a decision, and yeah, again, not very confident on it, so don't bet it is my advice. And finally, just to mention as well, there is only 10 fights on the card as of right now. So normally we get between 12 and 13 on UFC fight cards. Obviously, we've still got the TUF finale for the featherweights, which is going to be Brad Katona against, in my opinion, it's probably going to be Tyler Diamond. I don't really see Diamond losing his fight, so I do believe that'll be the finale. Obviously, I could be totally wrong, but we'll find out very shortly. The point being is if there is any more fights added to this card, and I know obviously the featherweight finale will be added to it, I will just drop my pick for those fights in the comments. So just keep an eye out for that once any new fights get added. And that's all she wrote, guys. So just a quick message from me. If you listen to this podcast on the Newsome MMA YouTube channel, it's also available on the Newsome MMA website too, along with so much additional content surrounding all aspects of MMA. It really does have something for everybody on the website. So we've got betting advice, we've got MMA podcasts, we've got a brand new DraftKings section, and specific content coming from Heavy Duty Fight Management too. Also, please check out my sponsors of Newsome MMA, which is CBD Life UK. You can access their offers from my sponsorship by clicking any of the banners on the Newsome MMA website, and you can also get 15% off your first order by using promo code Newsome MMA. So don't miss out on that offer. And remember, guys, we've still got UFC 226 coming up as well. That being the Saturday night card, as I've already mentioned. So that podcast will be out in a few days. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And we'll see you then.